Hi guys, so our sincere apologies for the technical issues. I'm Jennifer Lean, and so without further ado, I'll hand over to our Heart Foundation nutrition experts, Dave Monro and Lily Henderson.
Thanks, Jen, for the introduction. Great to be back on board. Thanks, everyone, for dialing in. Lily and I are really looking forward to the session. Just a couple of quick things at the start to recap. The first is we have lots of fantastic information on our website. So if there are nutrition questions or themes that come up, we'll look to post some links to those articles, those blogs, those web pages on the chat. The other really important thing is to say we'll be giving the Heart Foundation's general advice on heart healthy eating. We won't be diving into individual conditions or individual circumstances that a person might be faced with. Always we recommend people touch base with their healthcare professional for that sort of advice, where the healthcare professional can take into consideration everything that that person might have going on and give them a specific tailored treatment plan.
Great. Really important, and we will recap on just why nutrition is so important for heart health. Do you want to sort of give us a
Yeah, sure.
tip?
So there are risk factors that we can't do anything about. For example, our age, our ethnicity, our family history, and then there are the lifestyle factors that we can do something about. So there are things like our physical activity levels, managing stress, nutrition, what we choose to eat and drink. So with nutrition, it's always fantastic if we can get nutrition right at our younger years, because if we get the nutrition right there, it will lay the platform for a healthier future. And look, nutrition is a really complex area. For example, what might suit someone as an eating plan may not necessarily suit another person. We're all individuals, and there are a range of dietary patterns that we can be eating. I'd also have to say nutrition's a fairly complex area. It's a young science. There's obviously social media, which is fueling a lot of the views around nutrition, and often people looking for quick fixes. So Lily, I wondered if you just want to talk a little bit about evidence-based process and how we form our food and nutrition advice.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's really important at the Heart Foundation that we are an evidence-based organisation, and also as registered dietitians that our advice is aligned with the evidence. So we look at the science, we use that to inform our food and nutrition advice. We work with a range of different experts. We're totally independent from the food industry, and it's, I guess, important to sort of acknowledge that our advice changes and evolves over time as the science changes. And in terms of our healthy eating advice or heart healthy eating advice, when we look at the association between what we eat and our risk of heart disease, there's some really kind of key and obvious themes there. We want to be basing our diet around as many plant foods as possible, fruits and vegetables, whole grains like brown rice, like oats, plenty of heart healthy fats like avocado, nuts and seeds. Where we can, replacing meat in our meals with some plant-based sources of protein, and choosing whole foods where possible that are as close to how they're found in nature. So yeah, that's kind of we'll probably touch on those themes throughout the session tonight, but that's really in a nutshell, just a bit of a recap.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned a couple of things here, fats and also carbohydrates. And when it comes to a heart healthy eating pattern, we can have a diet that's either low in carbohydrate or high in carbohydrate, and equally the same with fats. Low in fat or high in fat. It comes down to the quality of the foods within that dietary pattern, the quality of the fats and carbohydrates we're actually choosing, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and I think we really try to emphasise and encourage that if you're wanting to eat or follow a heart healthy diet, you don't need to resort to an extreme or restricted diet. What's most important is that you are able to build habits that you're able to sustain and keep up over the long term. That's actually going to have the biggest impact on your heart health. So we sort of emphasise consistency as opposed to intensity. I like to think of it as, what can we add into our diet to give it a heart health boost? Can we sprinkle some seeds on our morning porridge? Can we add an extra couple of handfuls into a pasta dish we may be making? How can we add all of these heart healthy foods into the things that we're already making each day?
Yeah, fantastic, great. You talked about fats earlier, and one of the questions we're often faced with is, whether butter or margarine are healthier. And butter is obviously high in saturated fat, and so we would always recommend a oil-based spread over something like butter. However, it's got a little bit more complex in this day and age because there are a lot of people who want whole food options or less processed options, and that's absolutely fine. And I think the great thing is there are a range of options we can be looking at to provide that sort of choice. So things like avocado, hummus, various nut and seed butters are all fantastic, less processed options that we can use as alternatives to butter. It's also a bit complex in that it comes back to total diet. So for example, if our saturated fat intake is actually quite low and we've got a really good diet, then a little bit of butter on that toast or on that hot cross bun is actually going to be okay. So the importance of total diet is crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your heart health isn't defined by the spread you use. It's about all of the foods that you eat across the day, across the week, and how that all fits together.
Yeah, and while we're on the topic of dairy foods, I mean, milk, cheese, yogurt is another one where there has been a little bit of controversy over years, and whether we choose reduced fat or full fat versions. And the evidence used to be that we consume reduced or low fat versions, and actually there's a lot of research that's emerged in the last few years showing that those full fat versions of milk, cheese and yogurt actually have a fairly neutral effect on our heart health and some of those risk factors. However, New Zealand's intake of saturated fat still is high, and so we would still recommend people consume reduced or low fat versions, and when they are thinking of getting the fat in their diet, they're getting it from those heart healthy sources. So things like avocado, olive oil, nuts and seeds, those sorts of things. Now don't get me wrong, dairy products, cheese, milk and yogurt are fantastic foods in terms of providing protein, calcium and a lot of other nutrients. And so again it comes down to total diet. If your diet's good and pretty good from that saturated fat perspective, a bit of full fat dairy from milk, yogurt, cheese is going to be okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I was sort of going to add on there, another question we get asked a lot of the time is whether a vegan or vegetarian diet is the best diet for heart health, or whether you need to follow a vegan or vegetarian diet for heart health. What I would say is sure, if you're choosing, if you have a well-planned vegan or vegetarian diet and you're basing it around plenty of whole foods, plenty of plant foods, that could be a really great option. But there are also a range of other dietary patterns when we look at the evidence that we know are beneficial for our heart health. So a good example is the Mediterranean diet. And this diet includes small amounts of dairy, meat, poultry, and also fish too. So there's no one size fit all. Those foods do contain some valuable nutrition too. If you are going to follow a vegan or vegetarian diet, it's really important just to consider that there are lots of packaged and processed foods that are marketed as healthier or plant-based. So just being mindful of that as well. But when we emphasize heart health on diets for heart health, we really want to be encouraging a plant-rich diet, but that doesn't necessarily have to mean plant only. It's really about making it work for you and your household.
Fantastic. So we've covered a little bit about the Heart Foundation's approach to heart health eating and dropped into a few areas. Did you want to maybe get some questions from the chat?
Yep. So we've had lots of questions on a range of diets. So one of them being, what is the healthiest diet for the heart, and how do diets like keto and carnivore stack up?
Great question. And actually that's quite a good build from what we were talking about earlier in terms of vegan and vegetarian diets. There is no one size fits all, and when we talk about dietary patterns for heart health, there's a range of ways in which we can eat a plant-rich diet. I think the focus needs to be on including plenty of plant foods, and whether or not you include meat, dairy, and chicken, etc., is kind of less important. What I would say, so I'll talk about keto diets first and then talk about carnivore diet. What I would say is with a ketogenic diet, you can have a healthy version of a ketogenic diet if that works for you. You just need to consider that a ketogenic diet may be more likely to exclude foods that we know are beneficial for our heart health. So that may be grains, so we know grains contain fibre, various legumes like chickpeas and lentils may contain some carbohydrate and may be excluded, or even certain fruits and vegetables. So I think that's really important to consider, that you may be excluding some really nourishing and heart healthy foods. And then the other thing to consider with a ketogenic diet is they do tend to be much higher in fat. So we talked about heart healthy fats before. I would just be mindful that you really want to be basing your diet around as many of those heart healthy fats as possible. When it comes to the carnivore diet, I'd say this diet is less aligned to the Heart Foundation's advice. It's focused around lots of meat and poultry, etc., and doesn't contain any fruits and vegetables. So in terms of how does it stack up, it's not a dietary approach that we would recommend because it's not aligned with the Heart Foundation's advice.
Awesome. Okay, so Jackie asks, how to eat heart healthy on a budget?
Oh, great question. We know the cost of living has gone up in a number of areas. The food prices have gone up, so it is a real challenge. I think a good place to firstly think about is fruit and vegetables. And so if we can buy when something's in season, it's going to probably taste better, but also it's probably going to be cheaper. When it comes to fruit and vegetables, we also need to think about frozen and canned also counting to our fruit and vegetable intake. Now, with going to the supermarket, I think it's always really important to have a list, and have a list with a bit of flexibility in it. So if you've planned your week's meals and you go to the supermarket and let's say chicken drumsticks are on special and it's not in your weekly meals, then have a little bit of flexibility there that you actually buy some of those when they're on special. Think about cooking in bulk to maximise those specials that might be on and freezing some of the leftovers for a later meal. And the final point that I think is really important is to think about beans and chickpeas and those sorts of foods. And there's a lot of canned varieties that are fantastic to use, and you think about using those to extend some of the meat that you buy.
Great, yeah, $2 a can, can't go wrong, can you?
Awesome. So Dale asks, how many eggs are too many?
Oh, that's a really good question, Dale. And so we have advice on our website around eggs and heart health. Probably the biggest concern around eggs is how they impact on our cholesterol. They do contain some dietary cholesterol, but that's actually not the thing that raises our cholesterol. It's actually the saturated fat in the egg. Now, in terms of our current advice, if you are at an increased risk of heart disease, so if you've got high cholesterol or you have a heart condition, you can have up to 6 eggs each week. Everybody else can, there's no sort of limit, but what we do sort of recommend is you need to kind of take that into consideration amongst an overall heart healthy diet. So often it's not the egg, it's what we eat them with. It may be some bacon, some sausages, some white bread, so, and cooked in butter. So thinking about having eggs, they're a nutritious whole food, but eating them within the context of lots of other nourishing and protective foods. So it might be eggs in a salad, or they're a great snack to take and portable to have on the go, or even, a quick meal, an omelette is great to have at night. So
yeah, they used to be quite a good protein, a low-cost protein source, and they have increased in price, but they're probably still a reasonably okay in terms of price protein source to be considering. And yeah, that point around what you're cooking and having with eggs and that important sort of overall dietary pattern is a really crucial one.
absolutely.
So we've had several questions on which foods are good for lowering cholesterol. So what do you suggest?
I'm not surprised you've had several questions because it's one of the questions we're asked frequently. The good news is there are lots of foods that can help you to manage your cholesterol. A lot of those foods are plant rich, and the main reason they're beneficial for our cholesterol is because they're packed with fibre, which we know helps to lower cholesterol. So I'll run through some examples of the foods that we'd want to include, and it's about including lots of these foods wherever you can. So fruits and vegetables, as I said before, but for extra fibre, you want to make sure skins are on, and eating, any of the roughage or seeds or, the stalk where you can. Whole grains are really fantastic to include, particularly oats and barley. The main reason for that is these whole grains include have beta glucan in them, and this actually they have superpowers and really help to reduce your cholesterol. So you can use oats in a lot of breakfast foods and barley in lots of meals, but soups and stews, etc. And then heart healthy fats that we talked about before. So what swaps can you make to reduce the saturated fat in your diet? So can you swap from using maybe butter and cream to perhaps some olive oil or some lower fat yogurt? Those are all substitutions that will really help to manage and reduce your cholesterol. And also plant-based sources of protein. So we talked about those before, but there's good evidence if you replace some of the meat in your meals with good quality plant-based sources of protein, like kidney beans, black beans, butter beans, chickpeas, all of the good stuff, that can also help to lower your cholesterol.
Awesome. Okay, so people have also asked if any of these following reduce cholesterol. So celery juice, vitamin D, or nutritional yeast?
Yes, good. Really good question. There's probably lots of others on that list too. I think what I would say is when it comes to lowering our cholesterol and improving our heart health, there's not a single food or nutrient with superpowers. And if there is anything like a supplement or alternative therapy or natural sort of ingredient that you are wanting to take, it's really important that you check in with your healthcare professional to check that it's safe and appropriate for you, particularly if you're on any medication or you have a health condition. So I'll touch on each of those. The first one was celery juice. There isn't any evidence to say that celery juice lowers cholesterol. What I would suggest is actually having celery whole, because you get all the fibre. If you like celery juice, have it, but I would focus on the foods I spoke about previously. Vitamin D is an interesting one. There is probably some inconsistent evidence. There is some evidence to suggest that it may help to lower cholesterol, but as I touched on before, if you are looking to supplement your diet with vitamin D, it's really important to have a chat to your healthcare professional, because they need to take into consideration your individual needs, whether you have a deficiency and whether you can get enough vitamin D just through sunlight exposure. And then the last one, nutritional yeast. It's an interesting one. There's not much evidence on nutritional yeast, but we know it's a great a supplement or thing that vegans and vegetarians can consume to get some extra nutrition into their meals. It hypothetically may help to lower cholesterol because it does contain a form of beta glucan, but there's not really any evidence. So if you like the taste of it and if you are following a vegan and vegetarian diet, then include it, but I would recommend all of those foods I talked about previously where there is stronger evidence.
Okay, so Judy would appreciate some low sodium seasoning ideas.
Oh, great question. Yeah. So, yeah, it's always great to be making food taste fantastic, but at the end of the day, we don't need to load it up with salt to do that. So some great ideas for bringing flavour to food without adding lots of salt. We've got, for example, citrus is a great one, and we've got lemons and limes coming to season at the moment. So using that, the lemon and lime juice in a dressing, putting into food to give that really freshness, that pop and that zing is a really great one. I also think balsamic and red wine vinegars, various types of vinegars, can be great for adding a different flavour dimension to dishes. And again, it's probably one you could do with lemon or lime juice to make a really great salad dressing. But if we think of winter months, and we're getting into those colder temperatures now, so we should be thinking about things like herbs, and they don't have to be freshly grown at home. They can be a range of herbs that you can buy dried at the supermarket. Adding those into dishes to give flavour. If you can grow some fresh herbs at home, it can be fantastic to add those in, but that's totally up to you. And probably I'll leave my best till last, and that is chili. I think chili's a fantastic one.
You do love your chili.
Yeah, I love my chili. So I think chili is fantastic to use in dishes, and bring a little bit of warmth, a bit of heat, and a bit of flavour. Doesn't have to blow your head off sort of chili, but there are a range of also fantastic spices with a little bit of heat that you can get which are really fantastic to use and bring that flavour lift to a lot of dishes.
Awesome.
Oh, so Matt loves his chocolate. Unfortunately, he prefers it really sweet. So how much is he allowed to eat?
Great question. I love my chocolate too. We've just come out the back end of Easter, haven't we? Look, I think, when we emphasise heart-healthy foods, we don't like to sort of say, these are foods that you can't eat. It's really just about looking at the overall balance of your diet and thinking about how frequently you do have sweet foods. For some people, it might be soft drinks. For some people, chocolate. For some people, it might be biscuits. I think there's no magic amount of the amount that you're allowed, but what I would say is when you are eating chocolate, enjoy it and try and be as mindful as possible. Take it all in, use all your senses, try and, not go overboard and see how you feel just having a small amount. It's fine to have a little bit of chocolate here and there. We're all human and I enjoy the taste too. I would just say try and be mindful when you are eating it.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think people don't really always want to be operating as a 10 out of 10. Maybe a 7, 8, something like that, where you can still enjoy these foods, which are important parts of a diet, but the really important one is your overall dietary pattern, which is going to make the biggest difference.
So Lauren asks, any benefits to daily apple cider vinegar?
Great question. Well, we know cider vinegar is a great alternative to sodium, so salt, and can be used to make dressings or be used as an ingredient. There isn't a lot of evidence around cider and heart health, but there's potential benefits for our gut health. And the other thing to think about with any vinegars and having them is our oral health. And so just thinking about when we do have them, I know some people might have them first thing. But yeah, I'm not aware of any sort of benefits from a heart health perspective.
If the apple cider is going to be apple cider vinegar is going to be a vehicle for you having more fruits and vegetables, you're putting it as part of a dressing in some way, then fantastic, because that's going to have heart health benefits in terms of increasing your fruit and vegetable consumption. So that is something.
Absolutely.
So Steve says there used to be heart foundation ticks on supermarket food. Is the new system of ranking the food with stars just as good?
Yeah, it's a great question, and food labelling can be incredibly tricky to navigate and understand. So the tick program was a program that the Heart Foundation ran for a number of years. We retired that program in 2016. The Health Star rating, as the Health Stars, are a system that's run by government. So it's open to all manufacturers to use on their food products. It's not just manufactured foods, you can also put it on less processed foods as well. Now foods get their star ratings through a calculation. You get positive points for certain factors, like the positive factors, things like protein, fibre, fruit and vegetable content, and then you get negative points for things like saturated fat, salt and sugar levels, and that produces what's called the star rating of the food. Now, we tend to have a lot of the health stars on a lot of packaged and processed foods. So when you are shopping in those packaged and processed food categories, it actually can be a really great tool to use to help you identify a healthier choice within that food category. However, there are a lot of really great foods, for example, the fruit and vegetable section, which don't carry stars. And so we actually need to be filling our trolley up with those sorts of foods as well. So the health star rating system does have its place, but we need to be thinking beyond it as well when we're doing our supermarket shopping.
So Jude is in her 80s and has high cholesterol. She asks if A2 milk is beneficial for her heart health, or is she just wasting her money? Is light blue just as good?
Yeah, good question, Jude. And I would say the milk section of the supermarket is pretty confusing these days. There's a lot of options, both with cow's milk and plant-based milks. So it's no wonder you're a bit confused around what's beneficial. So just for people who may not be aware, A2 milk is a particular type of milk that's based on the protein of a certain breed of cow. Regular milk, cow's milk, is a combination of A1 and A2 protein. So when we look at the evidence that is available, there is some evidence to suggest or show that people who experience digestive symptoms, so maybe bloating or cramping, may see some benefit by using A2 milk, but there's no evidence that A2 milk supports improved heart health and reduces cholesterol. So what I would say is, Jude, if you're tolerating regular milk and you like the taste, keep drinking that. There's not really any reason for you to switch to A2 milk unless you've been directed by your healthcare professional. And sort of following on from what Dave mentioned and talked about earlier in terms of saturated fat, when you are choosing a milk, it sounds as though you'll be choosing light blue or green top milk. They're the milks that you should be aiming to choose if you're wanting to manage or lower your cholesterol levels.
So Lorraine asks, what food plan can be helpful for pre-diabetic?
Yeah, I can answer that.
Okay.
So in terms of pre-diabetes, Lorraine, so you don't yet have a diagnosis of diabetes, but you may have been told from your healthcare professional that your blood glucose is high. That's actually, you're in a great position to think about what changes you could make to your diet, to your lifestyle, to reduce your risk of developing diabetes. So what I would suggest is thinking about, there's a lot of consistency with the advice that we would for heart health and for our heart healthy eating advice. So what I would suggest is packing your diet with as many vegetables and fruit as possible. If you are having carbohydrate foods or grain foods, choosing whole grains, because these slow the release of insulin and reduce your blood glucose spiking up to high levels and keep you satisfied for longer. But also I would think it is a really good idea to really minimize or try and sort of really have low levels of any really highly refined carbohydrate foods. So white bread, white pasta, or being quite mindful of the amount that you're having. The other thing is just being mindful of the amount of sugar that you're having, and sugar in processed and packaged foods, but also table sugar, honey, maple syrup. So just really trying to have a really whole food diet wherever possible, and regularly checking in with your healthcare professional to see whether that's having any impact on your risk of developing diabetes.
So Deirdre asks, what percentage does diet determine cholesterol?
Yeah, well,
that is a really tricky one, Deirdre.
Yeah, it is a tricky one. I go back to the risk factors that we mentioned at the start, and nutrition is one of the modifiable risk factors, but also family history comes into the equation as well. So your cholesterol levels are going to be influenced a bit by family history in some conditions, but the great thing is that diet is one of the things that we can modify that will have an influence through on our cholesterol levels. And they're again those things that Lily talked about earlier, so increasing the healthy fats in our diet, things like beans and legumes and whole grains. They're all great foods for reducing our cholesterol levels.
Yeah, and I would sort of, just to build on what you said, I totally agree with that. I just think we all genetically have a different predisposition to, raised cholesterol. What works for one person may not work for another. Some people do have a genetic predisposition, and it only may be medication that is going to be the successful way to manage cholesterol. But what I would say is, don't let that make you feel disheartened, because all of those heart healthy foods are still going to benefit your heart health, benefit your overall health, your gut health, your mental health. So I wouldn't know the percentage. It's really probably depends on the individual. What we do know in terms of diet and lifestyle is that diet is thought to be responsible for about 50% of the burden of cardiovascular disease, so it is really important for prevention, but unsure about on an individual level how much it kind of, what percentage it kind of contributes to our cholesterol.
Yeah, great.
So Juliet asked for advice on eating for one.
Great, thanks Juliet. Great question, and I know when you are cooking for one, it can sometimes feel like a lot of work, but I think there are some great things you can do. I think the first thing to think about is making sure that it's realistic and achievable for what you can do. And then we actually, on our website, and we'll put put the link to this article. There's a great article I've written with some excellent tips in it for eating for one. So I'll make sure that's posted in chat. But one of those tips is cooking in bulk. And when you can find the time in your week to actually cook, say, a large portion of chili, or it might be a bolognese, or it might be a dal, and then thinking about that, not just having that on the night that you cook it, but using it over multiple nights. So, for example, it might be served with rice or pasta the first night, second night it might be in a wrap with lots of other vegetables there, and then you might also want to freeze some so you can actually pull it out at a later date and you don't have to cook a meal from scratch. So I think that's a really important one, thinking where you can cook a little bit more and use over multiple meals. When it comes to having things that are quick and easy in the pantry, I think things like canned fish, and that gets those lovely healthy fats that we talked about earlier, so canned fish, chili beans, those sorts of things can be great, relatively low cost protein options for you to put into a meal. And the other thing to think about is also vegetables that we can cook quickly. So they might be things like courgettes or beans, or even our frozen vegetable again, that can be a really fantastic addition to a dish and give us that vegetable portion quite easily and quickly.
Yeah, I would totally agree about frozen vegetables, especially when you have a mix. You know, your stir-fry vegetable mixes, you're saving time having to chop and prep all of those vegetables. Even, you know, sometimes I see at my supermarket coleslaw bags marked down, or you can find, if you see on special, the quick cook microwavable rice pouches, or couscous is quite quick to cook. So anything you can find that can help you to just save time in the kitchen, I think is really key.
Yeah, that's excellent. The other thing I just want to point out is that, you know, if you are often eating alone, then try and sometimes have a meal with some company. So getting that connection, because there is evidence to show that when you have connection, it increases mood and actually benefits our heart health. So that important point around connection when you are dining alone a lot is an important one.
So Hero asks, what is the best bread to eat, if any, and why? And do you rate keto bread of any significance?
Yeah, okay. So maybe I'll just talk about the best types of bread from our perspective to be eating. And I think actually before I even go there, the great thing about breads these days is there are so many options. You know, previously it was just loaf breads, but now we've got pittas, we've got wraps, we've got all these various options that different members of the family can enjoy, and you can base different meals around, which is fantastic. So we would always recommend people look for a bread with lots of grains in there. So if it's got visible seeds and other grains, then that's the best option to go for. If you're looking at the nutrition information panel, then you want to choose ones with the highest fibre content and compare products using the 100 gram column, and also breads with a lower sodium level. So again, use the 100 gram column and compare breads using the sodium and fibre levels is a great way to go. And while we're talking on breads, I think it's really important to talk about toppings, because you know, we can have healthy bread, but they're not necessarily the healthiest toppings in there. So try to fill that pitta, that wrap, when we're having a sandwich, think about those great fillings like lots of vegetables, avocados, healthy fats, those sorts of things.
Awesome. So Kathy asks, is a high fibre fruit, bananas okay as a daily snack?
Great question, Kathy. So what I would say when it comes to fruit is there's probably a huge range in terms of the amount of carbohydrate or amount of sugar, but it's all natural sugar. I don't think there's a magic number in terms of the number of bananas we should be eating each week. But what I would say is for heart health, for gut health, we want to be having as great a variety of fruits and vegetables as possible. So what I would encourage you to think about is, could you vary up apples, other types of fruit, just to get a little bit more variety in there in terms of nutrition. I mean, bananas, we know, are great for potassium, but I would say if that's the only fruit you're having, it's probably good just to try and mix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So Hingatu has diabetes and asks how to keep heart healthy. He'd like some easy and affordable recipes.
Yep, great. We have a selection of affordable recipes on our website, and we can again put this in the link in the chat. And again, coming back to the point I made earlier about food prices, it's really critical to be, thinking about ways in which we can extend that food dollar, look at some what's on special, cook what's on special, and make it go through multiple meals. Shop in season, all those sorts of things become really important things when it comes to basing our healthy, affordable meals, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for managing your diabetes, I'd hope that you're in touch with your healthcare professional and that you have had some individualised advice around what's appropriate and right for you in terms of managing your diabetes, and you're having regular blood tests, because that's really, really important. Heart health nutrition is pretty similar to diabetes nutrition, but there are some slight differences that it's probably good to be across. Consistently, we would recommend eating plenty of vegetables and fruit, but it's probably a good idea to check in with your healthcare care professional around what sort of is right and appropriate for you in terms of managing your condition.
So Yvonne asks about the use of honey versus sugar, which is better, and which is the best, peanut butter or nut butter?
Yeah, really interesting question. On the first point about honey versus sugar, they both contain lots of actually sugar. So, if you're using honey to sweeten things and you're putting pretty much the same amount as you would sugar, pretty much the same. When it comes to peanut butter, there are lots of options, and there's also lots of options of nut butter these days as well. We would always recommend a peanut butter that is lower in sodium and looking for one with a high nut content. So under food law, all nut butters have to indicate the amount of peanuts that they've got in their product, so you can actually see that on the ingredient list. And again, comparing sodium levels in those peanut butters by comparing the sodium level in the 100-gram column. But generally, peanut butter is a great source of nuts, and nuts and seeds have been shown to have a range of heart health benefits. So an easy, affordable way of actually weaving nuts into our diet. The other really important thing about nut butters, and there are a range of options you can get in this day and age, they can be a little bit more expensive, so just being, realistic about what's affordable for your budget. If you can afford a blended nut butter with peanuts and various other nuts, then you'll obviously get the benefits of not just what's in the peanuts, but it might have sunflower seeds or sesame seeds or linseeds in there as well, in which that is great because it's giving you a range of different fats that those different nuts and seeds will have in them.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I would say about peanut butter is, it's affordable. It's often a lot cheaper than the other nut butters, and it's fine to include. You don't need to have almond butter or cashew butter. Peanut butter is absolutely fine. You still get the heart health benefits.
I could almost blend two questions here, the banana and peanut butter, if you've had that. Anyway.
Actually, that's a really good build if you're wanting to, have your banana and you're hungry soon afterwards. Adding a bit of peanut butter is a really good way to add some protein and to make you feel a bit more satisfied too.
Yeah.
So Elizabeth says nutrition gets even more complex when you're trying to lose weight, and there's so much misinformation out there. Do you have any suggestions on what the best diet is for weight loss?
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to answer that. We actually recently updated the information on the Heart Foundation website on body size and on heart health. So I encourage you to have a look there, because we've got a page there which is all about managing your weight. Our advice has changed and evolved over the years, and when we talk about, our diet and weight for heart health, we actually are sort of now recommending that it's actually more positive and more empowering to be focusing on sustainable lifestyle changes. So we know from the evidence that often if people take a really extreme approach and follow a specific restricted diet, they may lose some weight. But the evidence shows that, after a year or even, a couple of years, a lot of that weight comes back on and there's weight regain. And people can often cycle round and round. So what we would recommend in terms of the best approach is, instead of focusing on that number on the scales and a certain amount of weight loss, is to really focus on building changes to lifestyle that are going to be sustainable long term. So, looking at ways that you can increase, the proportion of vegetables in your diet, be mindful and be really in tune with your appetite and fullness, looking at building in movement, physical activity, moderating and minimizing alcohol intake, managing stress, and also sleep too. So it's there's no sort of one best diet, and the evidence actually doesn't tell us that one diet's better than the other. Unfortunately, we wish there was a magic bullet, but when you look at the evidence between all the different diets side by side, there's actually no one better calorie restricted diet than the other. So we'd always recommend really focusing on trying to sort of build habits that you're going to be able to keep up for the rest of your life. Because we know if you do something quite restricted and quite extreme, you're just relying on willpower, and we've only got a certain amount of that in the tank.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Peter asks, are frozen vegetables good for you and cheaper than fresh? Are they value for money?
Oh, it's a really interesting and really tricky question actually, because it all really depends, Peter, what's in season, and what's accessible and those sorts of things. So I think it's always really useful to be considering the full range of fruits and vegetables, having some fresh but also some frozen and some canned. And things like peas and corn, those sorts of things, we can't get fresh versions of those very easily, but they're great for fibre and a range of other nutrients. So each individual vegetable type brings different nutrients, and so if we can have some frozen there providing some nutrients, and then also get other nutrients from fresh varieties that we perhaps can't get frozen, and they might be things like tomatoes and those sorts of things. But I think the best way to go is to look at an array, to shop in season, and utilise frozen, canned and fresh in a range of different ways.
Yeah, and what I would say is the frozen vegetable section of the supermarket's pretty good these days. There's a lot of different options out there. You may need to just have a think about a price that you're prepared to pay. But like Dave said, prices seem to be fluctuating quite a bit at the moment, and we're not sure how much of an impact the recent weather events, etc., have had on, we know, fresh produce, but perhaps frozen produce too. But there are fantastic thing about frozen produce is the other money saving aspect is you don't really have any wastage. So you don't have carrots sitting in your veggie drawer at the end of the week that are looking a bit limp. You sort of buy an amount of produce and you tend to use it all till the bag's gone. So I think you've got to kind of weigh that in terms of the amount that you're wasting.
So Ken asks, are low salt Vegemite and low salt peanut butter okay?
Oh, maybe. Yeah, well, first thing is, I actually haven't seen a low salt Vegemite, but there might be one that exists. But in terms of low salt peanut butter, definitely. So peanut butter, again, what I mentioned before about those great benefits that peanuts bring us. Nuts and seeds have been shown to have some really positive heart health benefits. Again, it comes down to looking at the nutrition information panel. Some peanut butters you buy are actually not labelled low salt or low sodium, but actually are pretty low in salt in the grand scheme of things. For a food to be actually called low salt, it has to be by food law under 120 milligrams of sodium per 100 grams. So you actually might find there's a peanut butter out there that actually has less than 120 milligrams but isn't labelled low salt.
I think that's a really important point.
Yeah. But if we take the salt levels out and think about the food, peanut butter is a great food and a great way of getting nuts and seeds into our diet. Or nuts, it doesn't contain seeds generally, but you know what
I know what you mean.
So Garth loves cured meats, bacon, sausages, ham. What are the best low sodium options here?
That's a really good question as well. So it would really come down to looking at the nutrition information panel on the product again. Generally, because sausages, bacon, ham go through a processing process, they generally have a reasonably high level of sodium in them because they need that for their preserving, for the sort of functionality of the type of product they are. Generally speaking, in terms of our latest red meat and poultry position statement, we would say try and limit the amount of sausages, bacon and ham you're having. The occasional one may be okay, but just think of total diet, and in terms of the best meat options to go for, there are other healthier options.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I think it can be tricky, but there's probably a little bit of a continuum with some foods. For example, like sausages, you'll have your really quick to cook sausages or Cheerios that are highly processed and probably likely to be a bit higher in sodium, and then you might have, you know, a slightly less processed version. Which still, you know, is going to have some processing and may contain some sodium, but it might
have a
be
higher meat content or something like that.
that's it. Might have a higher meat content. So there may be some, you know, I guess some better options within that category. But yeah, like Dave said, most of the foods in that category are going to be high in sodium and or saturated fat. And so that's why our recommendation is to choose lean meats with as little processing as possible for heart health.
So Jill asks, is wild venison okay?
Gee, Jill, wild venison, that sounds pretty good. So venison we would still consider under the definition of red meat, and we've talked about red meat a few times in this session tonight. And you know, absolutely, wild venison's absolutely fine. You know, we shouldn't get caught up in is one food necessarily good or bad. It comes again back to total diet, and a bit of wild venison as part of a really heart healthy diet is going to be absolutely fantastic. It's what you put around it that's going to make the biggest difference. But yeah, I don't get that question very often, but it's a great question. So wild venison would fit under our definition of red meat, and you know, we can certainly put the link through to our red meat section and policy and information on our website in the chat function.
I think people are mainly asking about beef and lamb and pork, but I think, really good point.
So Grace asks about lowering blood pressure through healthy foods and supplements, for example, hibiscus tea.
Great question, Grace, and really important topic because there is a lot that we can do through diet to help to manage and lower our blood pressure, and some of the strongest evidence here actually. I'll talk about hibiscus tea in a bit, but what I'll sort of start with is when it comes to diet, we know there's a really strong association between our intake of sodium or salt found in foods and our blood pressure. So if you are wanting to lower your blood pressure through food, what we would recommend is to focus your diet around plenty of whole foods, because these foods are naturally low in salt or sodium. So our vegetables, our fruit, our low-fat dairy, our lean meats, etc., our legumes. And so these are the foods we want to be basing our diet around. And because about 3/4 of the sodium that we do consume comes through packaged and processed products, supermarket food. So I guess that would be my first sort of key point for lowering your blood pressure with diet. And making decisions. I think we sort of talked about that before, but if there's a food that you are consuming a lot of and it's a packaged product, that's totally fine. But think about, is there a alternative that you could find, because that's going to have a real impact if it's something that you're having on a daily basis. It could be a breakfast cereal, it could be a type of wrap or pita bread, it could be a particular sauce that you use a lot. Obviously we all have our favourites, but if you can find an alternative that has a lower level of sodium and you're having it really frequently, that can have a big impact on lowering your blood pressure. What I would also say in terms of wider lifestyle, there's a huge benefit to moving our body. Any type of movement is really beneficial for lowering blood pressure. Everything from walking through to any type of activity that really helps to, that you enjoy, that gets your body moving. And there's also good evidence to show that if we reduce our alcohol intake, that can also help to lower blood pressure. Now, the point about hibiscus tea, I sort of touched on supplements before. It's really important to check in with your health professional around whether something like hibiscus tea is safe and suitable for you, particularly if you have a heart condition and particularly if you're taking any medication. My main question is, how much tea do you need to drink for it to be effective? And whether it's safe and suitable. There is some evidence to suggest it may help with lowering blood pressure. The amount that it helps is, unknown, but I think it's best to check in with your healthcare professional around whether it's appropriate for you.
So Yvonne asks, which oil is better to cook with? Coconut oil, olive oil, or canola oil? Canola oil.
Great question, and there are definitely a range of coconut oils you can get now. It's certainly gained in popularity over the last 5 or 10 years. We have a position statement on coconut oil and coconut fat, and that can be found on our website. Coconut oil is quite high in saturated fat, so we would always recommend people choose an olive oil or a canola oil over a coconut oil to cook with. Now, important point to make is when you are cooking with olive oil, it will lose its freshness, its flavour. So if you've got a really nice olive oil, it's best to use that for sort of salad dressings, and maybe go for a cheaper olive oil that you might use on the barbecue or to pan fry with. Equally, if you want to go for a lower cost option, then rice bran oil is another option you can consider if you don't want to go with canola oil. The other really important thing to say here about coconut oil and coconut products, if you do like the taste of coconut, and then a little bit of coconut oil, a little bit of coconut cream in a dish, it's not going to be a problem from a flavour perspective. Again, it's total diet, but for your everyday cooking, we'd always recommend a monounsaturated oil. That would be something like a rice bran oil or an olive oil to cook with.
Okay, so Ehoa asks, are dairy products a healthy choice? Which meats are the healthiest, and what meats should we avoid?
Yeah. Answer that.
Okay.
I don't mind. You sort of already talked about dairy products before,
Yeah, I
didn't
think
you?
so,
Yeah. And you may not have been with us, Ehoa, when we talked about that. Essentially, dairy products can be included as part of a heart-healthy dietary pattern. We do recommend choosing lower saturated fat versions, and that's because although the dairy has been shown to be neutral in its impact on heart disease, we tend to be having too much saturated fat in our diet. So if we can choose a reduced fat milk or reduced fat cheese, or a lower fat yogurt, that's going to benefit our heart health. So absolutely include dairy products. They contain valuable nutrition. And yeah, I would say to include them. Do you want to do the meat?
Yeah, so which meats are the healthiest and what meats should we avoid? We've developed an evidence paper, a policy position on red meat and poultry. It was developed a couple of years ago now. And generally what we say is people should limit or look to have 350 grams of red meat or less a week for so less than 350 grams to benefit their heart. And so that can be consumed in different ways. That's examples might be having a few meat-free meals a week. It might be thinking about the amount of meat that you have and stretching that through various dishes by adding legumes, adding beans, adding chickpeas into the dish. So there's a range of ways that you can do it. What we would say again is try and limit the processed meats that you have. So opt for lean meats and try and avoid the processed meats as much as possible. When we did the work on red meat and poultry was found to be neutral in terms of heart health. So having some chicken meals through the week can be quite good from an affordability perspective, but also fairly neutral in terms of our heart health. So, and finally, again, we have to emphasise legumes, beans, those sorts of things. If we can include those as much as possible, then they're going to be fantastic additions to our diet.
Yeah, and I mean, just sort of talking about processed meat, it can be quite tricky when you're out and about, or you're ordering off a menu, or you're at a bakery, you're ordering pizza toppings to hunt out, the heart healthy options. So you're thinking anything that's a bean, or maybe seafood, or chicken will be a better option than say your ham, your salami. But it can be sort of acknowledge it can be sometimes really tricky to steer away from processed meats. They're cheap and they're sort of widely available.
Absolutely.
So Christine asked for ideas on heart healthy and easy to prepare meals on a gluten-free and low FODMAP diet.
Okay, so Christine, thank you. We have lots of recipes on the Heart Foundation website. We actually have a few different filters, which is quite handy, and you can filter our recipes by gluten-free, so that can give you some good ideas and ways, recipe ideas for the things that you could cook. And then you could make the substitutions that you need to make on a low-fat FODMAP diet. It's difficult for me to give you that advice around specific recipe ideas because it kind of depends on where you're up to in terms of your FODMAP journey and which foods you're including and which foods you're excluding. But what I would say is quick and easy meals. We've got a really good blog on our website, and I think it's about having 5 or 6 ideas up your sleeve that you can throw together when you have minimal time. It might be a super quick stir fry, it might be a quick omelette, it might be having some leftover roast chicken in your fridge that you can pull into a wrap, but having some really quick and convenient things that you can do when you're limited on time and you want to throw something together.
Next question is, what is a cheap option to get more fish into your diet?
Oh yeah, it's a really challenging one, isn't it? The price of fish is pretty high at the moment, and a real challenge to people trying to consume fish. You could get a fishing rod, but no, that's the cheapest way to go. I can't fish, don't worry.
Not the most convenient.
Not the most convenient. I would say look at the various options in the canned fish section. There are a range of tunas, range of salmons, flavoured options as well, which provide versatility in terms of sandwich fillings. You can add them to a salad. You can also use canned tuna or canned salmon as the base of a dish, and we've got a lot of great recipes on our website which do use fish in that way. So for example, thinking of fritters can be a great way to incorporate salmon into those fritters. Loaves, quiche, various things like that can be a great way of having canned fish in some new and interesting ways.
And I would say check out the frozen section of your supermarket. You may be able to find plain fish frozen.
Yeah.
Depends on how big that section is at your supermarket, but that can also be an affordable way to get in fish when compared to fresh.
Yeah.
And also thinking about other seafood. So it may be mussels, super nutritious and really cheap. Prawns, you can get frozen prawns. So there's a few different options. I would sort of check out the frozen section and the canned section too.
Excellent.
Okay, so thanks for joining us, and apologies again for the technical hiccup in the beginning. It looks like we've covered all the questions we have time for. So sorry if we didn't get to yours. We'll try to respond to these in the comments. Dave and Lily, is there anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap up?
No, it's fantastic to have this opportunity, and thanks everyone for dialing in and being part of the session tonight. We'll make sure we post those various links on the chat. Awesome. And thanks again.
Yeah, awesome questions. Thanks everyone.
Awesome. So we appreciate you being here. It would be amazing if you give us some feedback on this session through a short survey in the event description. So please join us again next time on the 17th of May, where we will be speaking with 3 women about their personal stories and insights on living well with a heart condition. Thanks again for joining us this evening, and we'll see you again next time.